much in the same way as Marvel and DC. The difference is that where Marvel and DC have a shared universe, meaning that in Marvel Comics, the Avengers will cross over with the X-Men, and DC Comics, the Justice League will cross over with the Teen Titans, and Image Comics, you don't really have that. Image is just like a giant publishing house for all kinds of just creator-owned work. You've got Jonathan Hickman's East of West, you've got Todd McFarlane's Spawn. And the idea of Spawn was to take the kind of superhero archetype that existed at the time and somewhat modify it, adjust it, and then throw it back at the reader. So if I were a betting man, I would say that Spawn is kind of like a hodgepodge of a bunch of different characters. He's one part Batman, one part Punisher. I mean, he's got all these different things sort of wrapped into a cool bow. And the way this really picks up, the way this really shows itself is when this story starts. By and large, when it comes to character origin stories in comic books, you usually get the origin story almost right off the bat, within the first 6 issues, or at least the character, like a set of events unfold and the character becomes a superhero or becomes a supervillain. In the Spawn series, Spawn doesn't know how he got there. He doesn't really remember anything. All we know is that there's like a 5-year gap between the time he basically died and the time that he woke up. He gets these small little flashes here and there, these small little faces. He sees himself involved in various conflicts overseas, different things like that, but that's about it. But the one thing that sticks in his mind is this beautiful woman that he can't quite figure out. He doesn't really know who she is. And that's one of the big differences here, is that Spawn picks up basically putting pieces of his life together and not really understanding how he got where he was. But the funny thing about this too is that it's basically our ability to follow the story of Spawn as he learns who he is as an anti-hero more than anything else. But it's kind of cool here because what you end up doing, really the first big thing that he does is he immediately leaps into action. Now, this is kind of like Todd McFarlane playing on the nature of superheroes, right? I mean, we're not really given a whole lot of expose into like the character of Spawn. We just kind of know he's there and he's a person who can presumably do things. And so it's one of those situations where the actions of his character are designed to tell us who he is, as opposed to him giving us this huge explanation. Now, the other thing to bear in mind here is that this is very reminiscent of late 80s and early 90s comics. A lot of the characters that you're really familiar with in comic books, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, all those characters you're familiar with, they've been around since the 1960s or earlier, going all the way back to like the late 30s, early 40s, into the 50s, and so on and so forth. And so because of the fact that the nature of storytelling in comics between the introduction of Superman running all the way up until about the late 1970s kind of followed the pattern of saying, okay, I'm a superhero, here I am, and here's what I do, here's how I gain my abilities if I have any. That kind of went away. And instead, when you had like Rob Liefeld method of storytelling, which really goes all the way back to like the latter days of New Mutants going into the launch of X-Force, it was kind of like just on the scene. We know that with characters like Cable. Cable was just there one day. There was no real explanation of where he came from, how he got there. We didn't get that until the X-Force series started, and even then it was lightly teased in X-Force issue number 6 or whatever it was, and then we got an actual explanation in Cable's solo series. So it took a little while for us to actually get that information together, and that translates into this. But the nature of Spawn comes into sharp relief in the sense that he immediately jumps in and stops a handful of guys from basically like attacking a young woman, basically, trying to victimize her more or less. Now, of course, he makes quick work of these guys, but notice the kind of things that he says. He's basically like, look, you guys clearly picked the wrong one, like I'm here to stop you guys, that kind of a thing. But then suddenly he gets a flashback to like his own funeral, like a military style funeral. It's really Todd McFarlane taking this whole idea of Spawn and taking like the Rob Liefeld method of storytelling, for example, rolling it over into this whole thing and saying, now here's little tidbits here and there about like how this whole concept came into existence. But the idea is that Spawn is still literally trying to figure himself out. Now, another way that this is shown here is when he basically starts to remove his garb and ends up finding out that his flesh is almost totally destroyed. So again, he's still figuring these things out. Now at this point, we actually jump to this sort of demonic entity. This guy's name is basically Malebolgia. That's really who he is. Now the role he plays at the beginning of the Spawn series is the tip of the iceberg with regards to like the grander scheme of everything that's going on. That's one of the reasons why Spawn has lasted for so long, is because it's very much like this massive world building epic, that deals with angels and demons and different things like that. And so from here, we basically pick up with the introduction of the Violator. Now, to be honest, to kind of, inject my opinion in here, I love Violator. I think Violator's hilarious. And that's the way he was designed to be. The Spawn comics in and of themselves were designed to be some pretty dark comics. And so when it comes to the Violator, he's one part dark humor and then one part just like sadistic and screwed up. And this is because he really kind of opens up with him rambling on about all the different ways to like kill a person, to basically take out Spawn, different things like that, to like rip his spine out through his head and so on and so forth. Just really kind of being screwed up and sadistic. But at the same time, for Spawn himself, it really is just going through and trying to understand himself. Now, that's kind of one of the downsides about the early Spawn stories. Todd McFarlane spent a lot of time with Spawn just sort of like thinking about who he is and trying to figure himself out. honestly, I wouldn't go as far as to say this is like a necessity to have all this stuff, but it's really just one of these things where he kind of reflects on the world around him, because he really is like a guy who sort of wakes up with no real identity, you know, amnesia almost. And so again, switching back to the Violator, we basically joined Dawn Corp, where we basically have this mob boss, more or less, and the Violator's going through and killing each of these guys. But notice this, he's actually ripping their hearts out in the process, which is pretty screwed up. Like it's pretty messed up seeing it all unfold. But this is when we start to learn things about the kind of powers that Spawn has. One of these is to take on the form of another person. Now, the implication, or I guess the indication here, is that because he doesn't really have a strong understanding of his abilities, it happens outside of his desire, meaning it's almost like an impulse, a subconscious kind of mechanism that kicks in that he can't necessarily control. It creates a bit of mystery and it creates a bit of intrigue. Spawn is learning about his powers and we're learning about them at the same time. And you know, while all this is taking place, we suddenly start to get a little more information here. And we basically pick up with a guy by the name of Jason Wynn. This is kind of cool because again, this feeds into traditional comic book landscapes where you've got the arch nemesis, is really how this whole thing unfolds. Now, what we're told here is that with Jason Wynn, he was basically the mentor of Spawn, the mentor of Al Simmons, essentially. That he had taken Al Simmons under his wing and he had turned him into really a prodigious assassin. And what this did is it basically led to this revelation on behalf of Al Simmons that as time began to progress, that really Jason Wynn took enjoyment in essentially like bringing harm to others. It wasn't enough to just like execute these Black Ops campaigns at the request of the federal government. He had to go a step further, really carry out these missions, but do it in a way where he was more vindictive than he needed to be. And as time began to progress, Jason Wynn began to enjoy inflicting pain on others. And so because of this, at some point along the line, and the way things seem to be indicated here, is that Al Simmons intended to like turn on Jason Wynn, to basically turn him in, reveal the things that he'd done so he'd be put on trial for, you know, various war crimes, so on and so forth. And the idea seems to be that Al Simmons was taken out as a result of his intentions here. And so again, as time goes on, we'll begin to figure out more and more. We'll see more and more about the origin of Al himself. And so where Spawn kind of has this interesting situation where he kind of collapses, just being overwhelmed by the various memories that are occasionally flooding back into his mind, he's met by the Violator proper. And this is kind of cool because while the Violator does look pretty screwed up, in juxtaposition to Spawn, he looks pretty harmless. He doesn't look like he can do a whole lot. He looks like
quick access inventory updated.
But the funny thing here is that we also get little bits of comedy, you know, in the sense that like he basically relieves himself more or less. Now, I'm going to say to this day too, one of the really the only depiction of the Violator we ever got in film was John Leguizamo, but he was amazeballs. Oh my god, like if you guys never saw the Spawn movie, like John Leguizamo was the highlight of that movie. He was hilarious. But again, the Violator just kind of has it out for Spawn, the intention to basically kill him and eliminate him in his entirety. We're not told why Violator has it out for Spawn. We just know that he does. And so again, like from this point, you pick up with Malebolgia himself, this actual demon, and Malebolgia begins to kind of fill us in on a few things. And what we end up finding out here is that within the confines of this story, at least here in the early days, Malebolgia is basically the ruler of hell, or at least that seems to be the case. Now again, this is Todd McFarlane drawing on his time in Marvel Comics, because for those people who have been reading Spawn for any real measure of time, Malebolgia bears a striking similarity to Mephisto. They look completely different, well not really completely different, but they look very different from one another, but the roles seem relatively similar. Now, the motivation behind Malebolgia is really what differentiates him from Mephisto, but the point still remains the same. In Marvel Comics, Mephisto is a being who rules over a dimension of hell. Mephisto takes the souls of those he tricks. And so that's why, like, he took the soul of Dr. Doom's mom, for example. With Malebolgia, it's much the same way. The difference here is that Malebolgia really seems to indicate that, like, Spawn is going to serve a particular purpose. That Spawn is here for a very particular reason. And the reason really seems to be that, one, Spawn basically handed his soul over to Malebolgia, and two, he didn't read the fine print. He didn't know what was entailed in handing his soul over and presumably allowing him to return to Earth. Now again, this is small little tidbits being thrown in here. Small little things here and there. Not a lot of information is being given by Todd McFarlane. It's just kind of giving us these small little tidbits and allowing us to try to use our imagination to fill in the pieces. But from here, Spawn takes the most logical step in his character. And again, it's kind of a way for McFarlane to kind of give us this sort of tour of like the Spawn mythos, in the sense that Al basically dons the physical appearance of the blonde guy he's basically been mimicking from time to time and goes back to his own home, only to basically find Wanda there. Now the cool thing about this is that Wanda looks just as beautiful as he ever remembers. For Al basically coming back home and visiting his wife, it's really not so much a desire to like rekindle things, so much as it is to figure out what's going on with her and to understand where she is at the moment. The sad thing about this is that when he basically gets to his home, he finds out that his former wife has a daughter. And this is kind kind of crushing to him because it's the one thing he could never give her. Now, the indication seems to be that the reason why he was never able to give it to her is because his job just required too much. His job required too much time away. He wasn't able to pay as much attention to his wife as he should have, and the result was that when he began to realize how important she truly was, she was already gone. Not only that, we actually end up finding out that she married a guy named Terry, and Terry was basically the former partner of Al Simmons, and the two of them had basically grown closer through the death of Al. And so it makes sense that as time progressed, the two of them ended up getting together. And so this is kind of an interesting scenario here because it's one of those things where the way it's done by Todd McFarlane, Al basically has to let go. Like he has to move on. He can't be with his wife. But to see her happy is more important than being happy with her. And so that's the cool thing about this, is that he ultimately just kind of walks away. Now, the sad thing is that he's basically dealing with the idea that like some unseen force out there whom he doesn't really seem to know much about seems to be like kind of toying with his life and basically putting him in a situation where everything that's been valuable to him has been taken away. And so in this moment of vulnerability, he's suddenly met by the arrival of the Violator. Now, of course, the Violator does to him what the Violator's been doing to a lot of other people and rips out the heart of Spawn. But this again goes into the nature of Spawn's powers in the sense that when he's basically left dead, he kind of jumps back up again, begins to heal, and the revelation here is that he doesn't actually need a heart. And so the idea seems to be that Spawn is technically immortal. He cannot really be killed by conventional means. Now, it kind of brings in this whole thing of, well, what does he have to lose here? From here, like Spawn and Violator actually get into a pretty cool fight. Now, Violator is actually a little shocked because in his mind, he's kind of like, how do you not die? Like, you're a human. How could you possibly live without a heart? And so it's kind of funny because Violator doesn't quite know how to handle this situation. Of course, Spawn takes his heart, puts it back into his chest, and that's really the end of that. But the way that he talks is he immediately sees Violator as an enemy. And this again is a way for McFarlane to kind of set things up and say that once the whole situation with Jason Wynn is sorted out, the Violator will go on to be the main enemy of Spawn. That's the indication that's given in this whole story here. And so, well, the two of them do get into a pretty knockdown, drag-out fight that really like sees Violator getting like a hole blown into him and like his arm ripped off and different things like that. Ultimately, they end up having Malebolgia, who simply just pops up here. And this is when we start to get the explanation of what's going on. This is when we start to learn everything that's happening. Malebolgia essentially pops up and says, both of you are on the same side. You're servants for me. You just don't know it yet. But the funny thing about this is that Malebolgia goes on to explain that basically it's this ruler of hell and its goal is to destroy God. But the reason why Spawn is here is because Spawn is designed to basically increase the army of Malebolgia, to essentially like punish those who are evil and wicked or what have you and send their souls to hell. That's the point that he serves here. And the reason why is because Malebolgia intends to build an army that's large enough to challenge and conquer God and then bring an end to like his whole reign. And that's the whole basis behind why Spawn is here. Now, the funny thing about this, and this is where the anti-hero element begins to come into play, is that Malebolgia says, look, the way this works.
I've been in exile for a very long time. I was forced by false prophets to flee my homeland in disguise, degrade myself by pretending to be something I'm not, to be much less than I truly am. I spent a long time cursing my kind, planning my revenge and victorious return. Eventually, I got on with my life, and now they're all dead and forgotten by those who once worshipped them. There's a lesson in there somewhere, I'm sure. Thing is, I'm ready to be myself once again. No more disguises. Their false prophecies perished with the White God. I'm free, and I don't plan on anything or anyone changing that. It's beautiful, isn't it? And to think this thing was out there all along, while I wasted my time chasing a fucking hammer. I got what I came for, and I need to be moving on. Places to go, spells to cast, gods to wake. Spoiler alert, we'll fight, I'll win, you'll track me down again, just in time to watch your world tumble into chaos. Title scroll, lights come back up. Oh, wait, no, they won't. If I could kill you, I would. I really, really would. I don't like leaving matters unresolved. I do it cleanly and painlessly. None of the fancy stuff. I'm not that sort of villain. No stage magician. I take pride in my work. And I'm not afraid to get my hands filthy. But unless I grind you to a fine dust, the fucking bees will just whisk you away to safety. I've seen it happen enough times. I'll just make sure you're stuck here a while so that I can get on with things. Farewell.
Yikes.
Works is that the more you use your powers, the closer you come to like a second death. Basically meaning if you go nuts with all your powers, if you just use your powers for an extreme purpose, then you'll basically start decreasing your life at a faster rate and your soul will belong to me. Or you can use your powers slower and then eventually I'll get your soul anyway, but you won't be able to punish the wicked. And so the idea is that no matter what happens, Malebolgia will get the soul of Spawn. The funny thing about this too is that Malebolgia actually says here that in this particular circumstance, and really in any particular circumstance around the world, that when it comes to individuals whose souls are harnessed by Malebolgia, he can't just steal them. Al Simmons had to offer his soul. And so in a sense, Al Simmons sold his soul to the devil for whatever it is the end goal was. And so because of that, that's how Malebolgia was able to steal the whole basis behind him. Now, the whole concept here seems to be, and really to provide a bit of a spoiler here for future stories, the way this basically unfolded is that Spawn sold his soul to Malebolgia under the idea that he would basically be allowed to quote unquote return to Earth. And the whole basis was to gain revenge, but he would serve as like the Hellspawn. But when he showed back up here, his memory was essentially wiped, with the exception of a small few tidbits here and there. And so what this meant was that Al Simmons went forward as the Hellspawn and really kind of gets us to the moment where he's trying to figure himself out. But that's the whole point here, is that when it comes to the Violator, he seemed to be more of someone who kept Spawn in check, or at least keeps him on the path he's supposed to serve. But that's where the anti-hero element comes in, is because as we know, Spawn will go on to basically defy Malebolgia at every opportunity he gets to serve his purpose of like punishing the wicked, but really like pushing them more on the path of doing the right thing, as opposed to like expanding the army of Malebolgia. Now there'll be times where it's unavoidable, but that's kind of the role that he serves at this moment in time. And so the result here is that the way this really kind of begins to come to an end is that it's basically Spawn and its Violator on two opposite sides. They serve the same purpose, but they're none too friendly with each other. They're not allies. And so what you have is, you know, just Spawn kind of going about and doing his thing, basically going forward into the next few stories, where we begin to expand on his character a little bit more, learn a little bit more about his past and all that kind of good stuff. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna go ahead and bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.
Well, glad I didn't watch this video back when you released it. 'Cause it took a fucking year or two. You released it all. 1 year. 2 years. Yikes.
Dreaming about it, right? Like every single time the comments come in as a notification on my phone, it's like, will you cover Spawn? Will you do more Spawn? Okay, so for those of you guys who are playing catch up, we already did Spawn Part 1. We did it last year, actually. And that one's there if you guys want to go check it out. And we'll probably create a playlist because we're going to test this, right? We're going to test bed this. This whole week, we're going to do Spawn as backup stories, right? We're going to do our main normal comics that we usually do, but we're going to have secondary videos that are all going to cover Spawn, at least a whole bunch of Spawn stuff. Because I'm curious to see, is it that people really want to see Spawn, or is it just like a really small number of people really want to see Spawn? I'm kind of curious about that. With Spawn Part 2, this is really kind of Spawn getting into like the meat and potatoes of what his character's about. The first arc is called Questions, really, and it's like 4 parts, right? So you get the origin of Al Simmons as Spawn, that kind of thing, and that's what we cover, that's what we titled the video. This one is kind of him off to the races playing his role. The funny thing about this is that this is probably 6 issues into it, and back in the 1990s, the character of Spawn was part and parcel to how comics existed back then, insofar as the villains weren't the most incredible thing ever. The cool thing is that like they got really, really interesting as time went on, right? So the way this initially picks up is we pick up with a guy named Overt Kill. Now, Overt Kill does not actually get an origin until you get into the Curse of Spawn stories. And the Curse of Spawn was kind of like a spin-off series, so it's like Punisher and then Punisher War Journal. A spin-off series based on the character of Spawn, but it's designed to kind of explain a lot of the other characters that are there. This guy, Overt Kill, was originally just a guy named Nicholas, who basically, around 13 years old, started making a name for himself as more or less a hitman for the mob. Ultimately, he ended up killing the wrong guy, and his head was caved in, and then cybernetic enhancements were offered to basically fix him and then make him more capable, right? So he was like the $1 million man. But as it stands right now, he's really a major force and a major hitman for the various mobs that are out there. And the reason why that matters is because Overkill gets his name from literally just being over the top, right? So he's like the Tremor Brothers from Smoking Aces. I don't know if you guys ever saw that movie. If anything, he's kind of a pastiche on like the over-the-top nature of characters back during the early 1990s. Hence the reason why he looks so advanced is because if you go and you read Marvel comics, especially Marvel, during the 1990s, everybody had pouches, everybody looked all technologically advanced. Ant-Man is a perfect example of that. He looked like a space marine from Alien 2. But Overkill kind of gets his name from the fact that he's literally a one-man army. His enhancements really put him over the top in comparison to like most conventional groups that are out there. And so the result of that is what we end up doing here is basically jumping to a couple of mob henchmen. And the reason why is because with Spawn doing his thing, he's basically been taking out the mob. That what you have here is you essentially have a scenario whereby Al Simmons, when he was turned into Spawn, what we covered in part 1, is he was kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. If he decided to use his powers and to go forward and to like fight crime and defeat bad guys and so on and so forth, the energy, the finite amount of energy he has in his body will dwindle down. And then he'll die, and then his soul will belong to Malboja, the person that more or less created him, and then he'll lead Malboja's army of Hellspawn. If he does nothing and allows his power to basically just kind of go on forever and ever and ever, then basically he'd be standing idly by and watching the world burn. It's kind of an interesting scenario, and that's where you sort of get into what made Spawn so intriguing, right? And we'll talk about that here in a minute once we get into the fight between himself and Overkill. But what you end up having is these various henchmen who show up and really start hitting up, one of these drug addicts, and it's kind of like, give us the rundown on who this guy is, like who it is that's taking out our guys, so on and so forth. And this guy, Freddy, basically responds by saying, okay, give me the drugs that I want, and then like, I'll give you the information that you're looking for. And it's kind of like, no, give us the information we're looking for or we'll kill you, and then we'll give you your drugs if your information is worthwhile. Of course, once he drops the info, they end up killing him anyway. But what he basically reveals is that Spawn is more or less taking up residence in the various homeless sectors, right? The sense that it's kind of a cast-off or sees himself that way. And it's kind of cool because when this information is dropped to basically a guy named Tony Twist, he's the one that kind of says, okay, let's go find this guy and let's take him out, right? Because this guy's taking out members of our group, of our mob, the other Dons, the other mob bosses out there, want this guy taken care of. He's on our turf. It's our job to eliminate him, right? Otherwise, they'll see Tony Twist as weak. They'll eliminate him and replace him with somebody they think they can get the job done. And so because of that, what we end up doing is jumping to Spawn, basically when he ends up, having a conversation with a couple of homeless guys. And this is where things get cool, right? Because what he says here is that when he listens to these homeless guys talk, they're kind of like, man, you seem kind of weird and kind of strange and so on, and I'm sure you've got a weird story, but like we all have backstories. Who cares what we were before? What matters is who we are now. And it's kind of interesting. When you look at this, it's almost like homeless people are more forgiving of a human being than like the average person out there, right? People are, for the most part, exceedingly judgmental. You can do whatever you want in this life so long as I agree with it. But with these homeless guys, it's you have your own story, sure, but like so do we. And like we've all done terrible things, but that doesn't define who we are right now, right? Like what makes us who we are is what we do in this moment going forward. People can change. And so it's kind of interesting that Spawn can find redemption in essentially the cast-offs of society. And that's what makes him feel at home here. That's why he spends so much time hanging around the homeless population, is because one, he can fit in. There's already a lot of people there who look deformed. So if it came down to one of those things where he needed to basically hide his costume and show his true face, and people are going to be like, man, that guy looks rough. But like, so does John over there too. He looks rough too. So like, whatever, man, like everybody's got scars, so he can kind of blend in with the crowd, but he can also kind of be at home. When Al Simmons came back, what we covered in the first video, when he came back, he found that his wife, Wanda, had married his friend Terry and started a family, right? So he doesn't have a home there anymore. There's nowhere for him to go back to. And so he's just kind of free floating in this world now, and this is the only real place he can call home. What this does is it leads to these two henchmen basically tracking down this location where Spawn was last to have been believed, and then they end up killing one of the homeless guys. And in response to that, Spawn basically shows up, and it's kind of like, okay, one, you're going to tell me who it is that's tracking you or tracking me, and then you're going to tell me why. Now, this is one of the things you kind of ran into when it came to the early dialogue of the Spawn comics. As cool as Spawn is, the early writing was a little rough. It was a little like cliche in terms of how it was done, but for the most part, Todd McFarlane's first foray into like a wholly owned character, he could do anything he wanted to. And that's why people who read Spawn they absolutely adore Todd McFarlane, because they watched him grow as a creator as he was creating Spawn, right? So if you were somebody who started reading Spawn with issue number 1 and you've been reading it ever since, you were growing with Todd McFarlane as he was doing it, right? So you were watching him grow in real time. And it's a cool experience, right? To be alongside a creator as they're getting better and better at at their craft. But the result of this is that basically this, this particular guy that Spawn catches up to ends up offing himself. And in response to this, they're deemed to have been failures by Tony Twist. And so meeting with the rest of the mob bosses, it's okay, let's start calling in the heavy hitter, right? Let's call in Overkill. Is anybody against this? And they're all like, nope, take this guy out, right? Like, kill this guy. Well, this has gone on long enough. And so with Overkill being called in, he ends up meeting Spawn, kind of at these docks. And initially you would kind of look at this and say, okay, so like if you look at it in hindsight, like you look at it to Spawn as you know him now, your initial thought would be, okay, he's gonna overcome that guy quick, fast, and in a hurry. But the important thing to understand is during these early stories, Spawn was still learning what he was capable of, right? He was still learning about his powers. There were things that he could do that he didn't know he could do. The other part of this is that with Spawn using his power and depleting his necroplasm, basically his energy, that if it goes on too long, if he uses too much power, it drains to zero. He dies, goes to hell, and leads the forces of Malebolgia, right? So this is where the Spawn comic got super intriguing. It's a guy who can conceivably do pretty much anything, but chooses not to. It's one of these things where it's like if Superman acted like Batman, more or less. That's kind of how this goes down. The issue with this is that Overkill is just kind of this overwhelming force for any standard guy out there using any real measure of hand-to-hand combat, especially if they don't really seem to be as strong as Overkill is. And so the initial foray between himself and Spawn sees Spawn, of course, like ripping his arm off or ripping his hand off, but then like Overkill immediately gets the upper hand and just starts pummeling him, right? Just absolutely starts pummeling Spawn and then leaves him for dead. Now, this is an important thing because Overkill believes that Spawn is dead, right? He's just kind of like, I've done my job. This guy's dead. Like, we're just kind of moving on and doing our own thing. The reality of this is that it seemed as though the sensors that Overkill uses to determine the heartbeats of others to ensure that like they actually are dead appear to basically be malfunctioning. And so in his mind, Spawn is dead, when in reality, Spawn is not. But what he has come to face with is the fact that there are people out there that can just overwhelm him, right? Especially if he's not really using his abilities. Now again, if he used all of his various powers, he would have destroyed this guy, right? Like Overkill would have been crushed quite readily. But Spawn kind of goes back to the drawing board and says, okay, I don't really want to use my powers unless I absolutely have to. So like, I'm gonna go do what I do best. I'm gonna grab a bunch of weapons and just like shoot stuff up. And that's why Spawn looks so cool, right? Because this single page, for example, when he's got like his chains, he's got like his ammo, he's got his guns, these are like hallmark depictions of Spawn, right? Like these are the kind of things you think of when you think of Spawn, especially back in the 1990s, just like over the top, impossibly large guns, just different things like that, right? So the result of this is that locating Tony Twist, he really just kind of like shoots the place up. But there is a little bit of a plot thread that's introduced here. And this is what Todd McFarlane would do over the course of the early stories. A lot of what took place between the time that Al Simmons died and then came back, we didn't really know, right? So like in the early stories, we didn't know how he died. We just knew that he was killed. We didn't know who pulled the trigger. We just knew that somebody pulled it. We didn't really know a lot of these intricacies, these nuances of his backstory. And that's one of the things that made him so intriguing. And that's why Todd McFarlane's Spawn succeeded so well, because it took everything that was popular about like Wolverine, for example, the mysterious backstory, things like that. But it took that mystery of like what's going on with this character and then stretched it on. Not too long that people lost interest, but it didn't give us so much so fast that there was no more mystery anymore, right? So it was kind of the perfect balance, which is a very, very difficult thing to do, which I think is really a testament to how good of a writer Todd McFarlane was. But what we kind of get is a sort of flashback where he recalls a guy who basically had a gun and killed him. Again, we're only really shown this person in terms of like bones and a skull and so on, so we don't really know who this guy is, but we know there was some kind of vendetta, right? Like, I would have killed you for free. Nobody would have had to pay me for it, and this guy considers Al Simmons to have been a traitor. So again, kind of building on this mystery, this intrigue, this origin that we're not fully sure of. And so as a result of that, he ends up basically tracking down Tony Twist, ends up shooting up his office, and then basically says, like, have Overkill meet me at this location at midnight. I'm not done yet. The two of us are going to go forward and do our thing, right? So it's kind of cool. It's pretty interesting because what this does, it leads to basically Overkill showing up here. And when Overkill shows up to basically face off against Spawn yet again, Spawn kind of learns his lesson. It was very easy to get carried away with himself in the first conflict, right? To just kind of assume he could get the upper hand on this guy, as opposed to kind of treating him with the sort of respect that you have to treat somebody with when you're engaging in any sort of physical altercation, right? You don't know what they're capable of, and so it's not really like treating them with respect as a person, like, I'm not going to hit you as hard as I can. It's, I don't know what you're capable of, so I'm going to assume you're capable of anything and plan accordingly. And so realizing the cybernetic enhancements that benefit Overkill, one of the first things Spawn does is stab him through his cybernetic eye. And this has two major impacts. The first is that it takes away his cybernetic enhancements when it comes to his vision, and then two, it removes his depth perception. And so depth perception, losing that basically means he doesn't know how far away Spawn is. For the most part, it's all a two-dimensional space now. And it's kind of cool, right? Because Spawn could be like 15 feet away, Spawn could be like 5 feet away. The only way that Overkill could judge this is the size of the objects in relation to Spawn around him, right? And so as a result of that, the two of them sort of going at it, you know, and of course, like Spawn sort of taunting Overkill by basically like showing what his true face looks like when he's, you know, burned all to pieces and so on and so forth. But in this moment of arrogance, an Overkill basically gets carried away with himself. Spawn ends up breaking out this colossal gun and blows a hole through this guy and essentially kills him, right? His whole cybernetic system starts shutting down, and then Spawn's like, done, and then just kills him just like that. It's a quick fight, right? It's very, very fast and very, very quick, and it makes sense that it would be that. This is really where it ends, right? It's kind of like, okay, so like Overkill's dead, Spawn's like, the cops are going to be called, so it's time for me to bail out. But what this was designed to do, and the reason why it happened so quickly, is if you're not really familiar with like McFarlane's writing style, you would look at this and you would say, okay, so this was like a really rushed story. When in reality, it wasn't. What it was designed to do is to show Spawn can be defeated if he doesn't pay attention to what he's doing. Just because Spawn has these abilities doesn't mean that he's all-encompassing, impossible to destroy, right? Especially if he's not using his abilities. What it does is it's designed to kind of build on the nature of the character and say, there's more to Spawn than just a guy who can like use his necroplasm and his chains and hooks and things like that. Using your mind is just as important as using your body effectively. And it's a really, really cool moment because it builds on the nature of the character. That's one of the reasons why it proved to be so resoundingly successful. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like. And yeah, keep a lookout. Tomorrow we will continue our Spawn videos. Peace. I want to say thank you to all of the new patrons who have joined. Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so we are continuing our coverage of Spawn, and in this video, we're getting into the origin of Angela. Now, technically speaking, this doesn't happen in this order in terms of continuity. It actually comes later on as part of the Curse of Spawn storylines, and the Curse of Spawn was basically a kind of side-along series. You know, what we mentioned in the last video, it was a companion series that gave us like the origins and stories of various characters who were out there. I would say Angela is probably the most popular of the supporting characters, and a lot of you guys who are unfamiliar with Spawn but are familiar with Marvel are probably looking at this and saying, I thought Angela was a Marvel character, and she is now, but it wasn't always that way. Back with Spawn issues 9, 10, and 11, Todd McFarlane had basically contracted out to Neil Gaiman, Dave Sim, and Frank Miller, and then actually had Alan Moore write a story as well. But basically they were contracted out to write these one-shots for the Spawn comic. And the reason why was really just to draw names, you know, to draw attention, you know, readership to it in the sense that...
Did you come for the library amnesty?
At the time, and so was Spawn.
Regrettably, our alumni schedule for the semester has been heavily impacted by the massacre.
That just has like a big name, and Frank Miller had been a big name for quite some time, especially right after his run on Daredevil.
Quick access inventory updated.
Right, I mean, the guy had like set the world on fire with his Daredevil run, so it only made sense that after the Dark Knight Returns, he was like a huge name, right? So to have him attached to a Spawn story would draw a lot of eyes to it. The thing that makes this interesting is that Neil Gaiman had introduced a couple of different characters in addition to Angela in issue number 9, right? In Spawn issue number 9. But this was kind of a point of contestation between Todd McFarlane and Neil Gaiman, insofar as when Image, you know, in terms of their policy, it was the idea that if you create a character, you own the character, right? That was their big beef with Marvel, right? It was the idea that like, if you create a character for Marvel, then like it belongs to Marvel now. Whereas if you create a character at Image, it's totally yours. You know, whether you can market it or not, it's totally up to you. But they're just a publishing house, right? It's your work, it's your thing. You don't have to worry about selling off the rights to anybody. Angela proved to be exceedingly popular. And so what this did is it led to a legal dispute that was settled in 2002 and then finalized in 2012. And the way this played out is that with Angela being as popular as she was, and then Neil Gaiman coming along with the idea that I created the character, even though technically according to McFarlane, he argued that Neil Gaiman was basically contracted to create a character or to write a story, meaning that the character that was created, Angela, was owned by McFarlane and not by Neil Gaiman because it was created for Todd McFarlane's title. This ended up kind of a pretty lengthy lawsuit that spanned, you know, a pretty good amount of time. In 2002, it was kind of settled in the sense that like they both co-owned the characters that Neil Gaiman had created. And then in 2012, Neil Gaiman got total ownership of Angela. This coincided with the desire of Joe Quesada and them at Marvel to bring Angela over to Marvel Marvel Comics, probably one of the most squandered opportunities in the history of comic books. The result was that in 2013, Angela was basically purchased directly by Marvel from Neil Gaiman and then brought in through Age of Ultron.
Quick access inventory updated.
They made her like Angela, Queen of Hell, and then just wasted her after that. She was on, like, I think most recently she was on like As Guardians of the Galaxy. Angela needs her own solo book. She's interesting enough, right? She's super cool. But this is the original origin for Angela in the Spawn comics, right? So the way this plays out, we're kind of yanking this out of an existing story. There is kind of a story that's going on at the moment, but it's not really relevant to what's going on with her character. It will be later on. For those of you guys who recognize the face of this guy, the man with the glasses, please do not spoil anything. Please do not tell people. I know it's a pointless endeavor to ask that, but please don't tell people. But in any event, basically this picks up with a woman essentially just like fleeing for her life with her baby in the era of like proto-myth, 100,000 years ago. Now that number 100,000 is pretty important, but basically it's 100,000 years ago that this all takes place. And this woman's basically fleeing for her life from bandits and all kinds of crazy guys. And then in the midst of it all, she kind of sees this face looking at her from a rock, and then is sort of overcome with like this rage, right? And ultimately ends up killing all these guys. Well, then following that, she takes the baby, ends up putting it in a tree, when you have these wildcats more or less that start like consuming the corpses of these men. But fearing for the death of her and her child, she puts the baby in a tree and then ultimately ends up just kind of sacrificing her life to ensure her baby's survival, right? And in the moments when this happens, a kind of angel comes down, a seraphim comes down, and then basically rescues the baby, right? But this woman sacrifices her life to save the life of her child. Following that, you jump directly to Egypt. And what you have is this woman who's basically being made to work with slave labor. And where you end up having, you know, the last of her sons who's basically killed. His muscles give out, he hasn't really eaten or drank anything, and he's crushed by the rocks. She really kind of goes to grieve to him, and then in turn is whipped to the point where she almost dies. Following that, they take her, they whip her even further, then they string her up and leave her to die. And then again, she really just kind of greets her son, you know, as an angel that comes down and tells her the life you're going to get after this kind of life ever after is infinitely better than anything you're experiencing here. But yet again, this specter of death shows up. And so from there, you jump to a young girl, and we're not really given a time frame, we're just told it's during the era after slavery. If I were a betting man, I would say this is probably during the Rosewood Massacre. If you guys aren't familiar with that, you should look it up. The Rosewood Massacre is a really important moment in American, Southern, and Black history. But basically, this young girl is kind of fleeing for her life after her parents were killed, right? In what's called the Forest of Dead Bodies. And so far as there was a point whereby all these bodies were strung up from trees, and literally when you went through there, it was just all these bodies hanging. And the result is that she again sees the specter of this guy.
Quick access inventory updated.
And get away as best she can. She ends up stumbling across the young boy that she spent time with named Jeremiah, who of course was hung as well. But as she's fleeing, she ends up tripping over this branch and ends up going, you know, falling down this hillside and into the water where she doesn't really have the ability to swim, and begins to drown and then pleads for help. One of the clansmen sees her and then shoots her, and that's the end of her. But she's greeted by the angelic appearances, more or less, of her mother and her father, who really just kind of whisk her away to heaven. And so following that, you travel to Auschwitz. And I hope you guys are kind of noticing a pattern here. It's this pattern of basically people dying, but experiencing the process of traveling to heaven. For this one particular woman, her children are also being sent to the gas chambers. And so as a result of this, she basically, you know, plead to their children to just run as best they can. And the reality is they were probably going to die, but in a situation as desperate as that, to just flee and have the chance of escaping is better than just like going to the gas chambers, right? And, you know, any chance for hope, any chance for survival for her children is better than none at all. And so of course with her children basically being mowed down, she in turn is taken back into the line, and she kind of proceeds forward accordingly, and then, you know, ultimately ends up perishing in the gas chambers. But that's how this process is, over and over and over. And so the final person that we get is basically this very, very old woman who's essentially dying of cancer, and her life is for the most part completely gone to pieces. Her husband has essentially abandoned her. He was struggling with alcoholism. The youngest of her sons basically died of AIDS. Her two daughters are living out in the world somewhere and don't care how she's doing. Her oldest son has basically been consumed by alcoholism as well. There's really nothing left in her life. It's just her with nothing to really live for. And so seeing this specter of death, she basically ends up, you know, kind of giving up and ultimately ends up perishing. But what matters here is that these 5 individuals who basically died by tragic means, but who were greeted with life everlasting following their death, all sort of coalesce and come together in the form of Angela. Now the question is, why? And this comes by way of a woman named Catherine. what we end up doing is traveling to a place called Elysium. And when Angela is more or less born, or when she's kind of coalesced into the being that she is now from these 5 spirits, that following this birthing process, Catherine begins to sort of give her a tour of this area, showing her what's around here, showing her what Elysium is, and basically says that we are essentially angels. It's more or less what she says, right? We're angels, we're more or less soldiers, and we are kind of the antithesis of the Hellspawns. That Malebolgia has this massive army of individuals that he's creating, and he has these Hellspawns that get created every so often. They're designed to kind of lead his army of the dead. By whatever manner and whatever means, our job is to kill them and to ensure that leadership role is never undertaken. And what they have is what's called a hall of trophies. Basically, all the different Hellspawns over the however long this war's been going on that they've killed, right? Successfully managed to eliminate. And it's kind of a cool thing, right? Because what this does is it expands on the notion of good and evil, right? Because when you kind of look at the Spawn mythos, it's just like Al Simmons running around killing people who do bad things and that's it. But this really sort of expanded the landscape in a huge way. Now, by the time this Curse of the Hellspawn story had come out, the landscape had been expanded by a pretty good chunk, right? It just didn't really involve Angela. It did, but you didn't really know her character, her origin, or anything along those lines. But what happens is Angela is basically taken to this door that stands 1,000 feet tall, and when she enters, she encounters God. And what God does is basically start taking her through and essentially saying, you know, when Angela asks, like, is this heaven? God says, no, it's just kind of a place where I walk around and just sort of do my own thing and gather my thoughts and so on. But what God does is basically say, you were created by these 5 individual souls who would sacrifice their lives for the people that they love. And what this meant was that you are by definition a being composed of goodness. And that's why you exist the way you do, because if you were being composed of evil, you would succumb to the power of Malebolgia. Now, in the Spawn universe, when it comes to like good guys and bad guys, it gets pretty blurry. So she's a good guy insofar as like good and evil are defined in the Spawn universe. But essentially, it's this notion of your job is to go out there and to basically fight off these various members of the
access
Hellspawn,
inventory
right? But you can
updated.
never stop. You can never give ground. That evil is a force that's always encroaching. It's always trying to drag you down. It's
Quick
always
access
trying to convince you that you
inventory
can't win.
updated.
But you have to keep on fighting, because if you don't, then yes, you will lose, right? So it is a constant struggle and it is a constant battle, but it's one of these battles that more or less has to always be fought. And so it's kind of a cool moment, because following this, what you end up getting is Angela basically engaging in this kind of combat of sorts with Catherine, kind of train her, get her prepared for what it means to be a soldier of heaven. And you get this kind of cool moment, because what they end up doing, you know, in kind of this thing, you know, Catherine says, well, I want to show you something before we you know, depart, before you're officially inducted into our guild, for lack of a better word, you know. And she says, this is a very, very old Hellspawn, right? This guy is exceedingly powerful. And Angela's kind of taken aback. She's kind of surprised by how capable and how massive this force is. And she's kind of like, you know, who in the world took this guy out? Was it you? And the response of Catherine was, no, it was you 100,000 years ago, right? Like a long, long time ago. And where Angela looks at this and says, well, that doesn't make any sense. I've just now been created. How could this have possibly been done so long ago? That's where we sort of get this explanation of how it is that Angela can be 100,000 years old, yet have been created after the events of like World War II. That when it comes to Elysium, it spreads all across time and space. You can go to any point in time, in any space you want to within the universe, from Elysium. And so the idea is, following her creation, she's sent 100,000 years ago to go on a mission to kind of just eliminate people, to basically take out these various Hellspawns that are out there. And so following this process of basically being inducted into the angelic soldiers, these angelic warriors, what Angela is given are 2 things. The first are the angelic ribbons, and the second is the dimensional lance. The angelic ribbon is similar to like Spawn's K7 Letha, which is the suit that he wears, which grants him the ability to kind of extend his suit out to, you know, create weapons or stabbing objects and different things like that. But it's an extension of himself that kind of helps to bolster his abilities in combat, and can just outright like heal him and even operate of its own accord, right? If Spawn is knocked unconscious, it'll continue to protect him, things along those lines. The ribbons aren't really exactly like the K7 Letha. They do offer some measure of support in the sense that they can keep Angela warm, or they can kind of be an extension of combat. They're not indestructible, but they can help her in combat. But the dimensional lance is really the important object, the one thing that really allows Angela to defeat Hellspawns. Now, the form and function of the dimensional lance is actually explained in the first appearance of Angela in Spawn issue number 9, and we'll cover it here, but we'll also cover it again once we get to that. But Angela really kind of run over the various weapons that are available to warriors of heaven who track down these Hellspawns and face off against them. And because of the fact that things like the K7 Letha are so capable, that what they end up having to do is use the dimensional lance in order to get into close proximity to a Hellspawn and then send it away from this dimension, leaving only its carapace behind, or its suit, basically the K7 Letha behind, which can actually be captured by Angela and in turn turn, once it's terminated, use it as a trophy and take it back. And that's how things have always kind of been done. That's how things have always just sort of been handled when it comes to the various warriors of heaven. The funny thing is that when Angela encounters Spawn for the first time, things are going to go radically different. Well, they will, but they won't. They will not go in the way that Angela expects. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. This is the origin of Angela. She's officially inducted into the ranks of the Warriors of Heaven and goes forward to become a killer of Hellspawns until she meets Al Simmons. And then everything changes. But we're going to bring this video to an end.
Hey guys, welcome back. So getting back into the Immortal Hulk, which is a run that is just saturated with fan appreciation, in my opinion, because even with the constant chaos throughout the series, it's not like things are just coming out of nowhere. And so before we get right into this, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squad up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so at this point in time, when we had seen Xemnu arrive, and in the eyes of the public take down these creatures from Monsters Island, who were also summoned by Dario Agger, it was clear to us as the reader that this was being done as a tool to sway the persuasion of the masses. Because on top of this, with Xemnu using his radio telepathy to beam through all the news and media cameras as he was getting torn to pieces by the Hulk, it was very similar to the same method he had used years ago when he had the world believing that he had his own TV show and that he was some positive influence for children. But in modern day, it seems like that influence has been amplified 100 times over. And with doing so, it's not only like Xemnu wants to resume the positive influence of who he was, but in addition to that, he wants to be the world's definitive Hulk, as well as take the place of other heroes within the people's memory to almost make it seem as he had never left. But even with doing this, it's like he's subbing himself in with pre-existing memories, which is something that can be even a bit more tricky with today's technology. But as we've seen with the fight, and I can't even call it a fight, it was more like a tear down, because the Hulk pretty much pulled a jerry-rig everything with Xemnu. Like, let's tear down this cyborg and see how it ticks. But with this encounter being cut short, with Dr. McGowan pulling the Hulk out of there, mainly because she knew that the Hulk was doing more harm than help, and that tearing down Xemnu would only make things worse. But on the flip side, this is exactly what Dario Agger wanted, and even to take it a step further, it's more than what he had expected. And the effectiveness of this is a result of a few things that have been in play. Because one, Dario Agger, he controls the majority of the news media,
Quick
and
access
I want to say even
inventory
portions of social
updated.
media, but with doing so, this allows him to give the majority of the world tunnel vision to what and where he wants everyone to look at, which for Xemnu literally amplifies his power, because it's not like he has to do the old-fashioned reaching up to a satellite and transmit a signal back down to whoever might have a television, because now everyone has a television in their hand. Everybody, young and old, has a cell phone, they have an iPad, and even if they're not watching the news, they're on social media. So with doing that, they're all readily available for whatever influence to make it their way. But also during the process of explaining this to Dario Agger, Xemnu also makes his attempt to place his influence over Dario Agger as well. And with doing so, he makes the suggestion of making Earth his new magic planet, but of course it doesn't work because the Minotaur's mind is shielded, and Dario Agger is pretty much like, you want the planet Hulk? Nah, that's not gonna happen. But also at this time, with Xemnu needing to complete his repairs, because practically he's a cyborg, and after his recent encounter with the Hulk, not only did he need physical repair as far as his machine parts, but he also needed sustenance for the portions of him that are still organic. And one of Dario's men was like, hey, I'll find somebody that ain't nobody gonna miss. We'll find somebody, that ain't no problem. That ain't no problem. But no, Xemnu was pretty much like, I'm hungry now. I need to eat now. And in that moment, Xemnu just contorted forward on all fours to where his back opened up like a blender. And it's like you can even see his haunting red eyes glowing off the reflection of the floor. Like straight up out of a horror film. Or like your Tales from the Crypt, or even Tales from the Dark Side. And I'd even more so say Tales from the Dark Side, because Tales from the Dark Side had your myth of the Grither. But on top of this, like jumping back to Robert Bruce Banner. And I say his full name for a reason, because the world pretty much goes back through its full history, and it's here that we see, as a result of Xemnu's influence, everything about your Robert Bruce Banner Hulk, it has all been flipped and skewed to be perceived in the worst way possible. And this stretches all the way back to his origin with the Gamma incident, all the way through the events of World War Hulk, which is one of those things to where the Hulk ought to be like, okay, well, I'll let you have that one. Because really, it ain't that hard to make World War Hulk sound like Hulk was the bad guy. But on top of that, and I'm sure it flipped through much more of his history, but with it stretching throughout throughout many of these moments and reaching up till now, with Bruce Banner declaring war against the world, it really just showed us that Xemnu had put into place the complete opposite for the Hulk, with making Banner out to be the definitive bad guy. But in the case of Banner, as far as the general public, they found it pretty easy to turn on Banner and the Hulk. But with others who know the two of them, like Amadeus Cho and Jackie McGee, with them you can see a bit of conflict with reason. Because with Amadeus Cho, he has like that classic reasoning with, okay, the Hulk might be a little bit crazy, but at least Banner's trying to pull him back and guide the Hulk so he's not completely unhinged, which was pretty...
Actually, I'm gonna save you guys for tomorrow.
Pretty much how it was before, all the way up to Avengers No Surrender. But I don't think Amadeus is aware of that, because at the time,
Quick
I
access
believe he was on
inventory
Sakaar. But in the
updated.
case of Jackie McGee, she's now torn between this place of blaming Banner for the death of her father, but she still recalls the recent acts of the Hulk saving her life, and her remembering meeting the Hulk and realizing he's different than what she expected. But
Quick
after this,
access
jumping back to
inventory
Shadow Base
updated.
Site G, to where at this time we know that something is not right with Banner. To where at this time he's looking in the mirror and he's constantly saying nothing is wrong, and at this point in time the Savage Hulk who's in there, he's still wilding out. Because if you guys remember, back when Dr. McGowan pulled him back to Shadow Base Site G, we had noticed at the time that the Savage Hulk was trying to tell them something. And not long after they had gotten back to Shadow Base, Devil Hulk had taken over for a little while, and at the time he had proposed what is still kind of the lingering question, what is a Hulk? Which is something that I really feel like the series will double back to when Xemnu and Banner go for round 2. But jumping back to where things are now, Rick Jones comes in to check on Banner, and it's here where Banner tells Rick that they've been spending too much attention on Roxxon Corp, and that they should move their focus towards smaller targets to shake up the humans and put them to fear. And immediately Rick recognizes that this does not sound like Banner, which it doesn't, because this is not the plan of Banner. Because like we talked about before, his plan of destroying the world, it's actually his method of saving the world, and even more so saving the people. But the key thing to pay attention to in this moment is that Bruce Banner, he corrects Rick Jones here by telling him, don't call me Bruce Banner, but instead refer to me as Robert Bruce Banner, which essentially means that Bruce Banner has been affected by the influence of Xemnu, to where at this point not only does he believe the history which Xemnu has fed him of him being the bad guy, but it's also in a way skewed his intentions to line up with the fabricated history which Xemnu has given to the world. But also at this time you have Dr. McGowan, who goes to speak to Doc Samson, which she is doing after speaking to the Devil Hulk. But with this, she shows Samson a recording of her speaking to Rick Jones and Harpy about her history, which we had talked about in the previous video, with her running into Daredevil while she was working for the Kingpin. And this is a bit of what I was talking about as far as the modern technology working for Xemnu but also working against them, because when you take factual history and moments from people's memory and you take that and place in their mind something completely different, like it doesn't matter how real you want to make that thing appear, because even with these screens that are available to everyone, you also have cameras. So alongside these memories, you also have recordings, you have audio, you have proof of what truly conspired during that time. Which is why, like, those memes that was going around with the deep fakes saying like, I'm gonna tell my kids this was absolute carnage, like as close as they look, things like that just won't work in reality. But back to this conversation between Dr. McGowan and Doc Samson, to where after playing him the footage and confirming that what was said on the footage contradicted her memory, it was here that she realized what Xemnu was doing. Because essentially it's the Mandela effect but on a larger scale. Because essentially the Mandela effect was this thing where a number of people who remembered Mandela's funeral taking place in the 80s, a number of years before he died. And to this day there are a number of articles about this on the internet, like in real life, where people believe like this is proof of alternate realities, so on and so forth. But it's also here where Dr. McGowan goes on to tell Doc Samson that she had figured out that it's the same case with Xemnu's TV show, The Magic Planet, which come to think of it is a contradiction within itself, because back when Xemnu had did the whole TV show thing, it was actually called the Astronauts, of which thank God that wasn't a real thing either. But on top of Dr. McGowan figuring this out, like, here's another thing, because when she asked Doc Samson if he knows that she was transsexual, and Samson was like, well, yeah, I knew, I just, didn't want to bring it up. But when she mentions this, it immediately takes me back to our talks in the previous video about her history before working with Kingpin, to where I kind of speculated to her working with the Weapon X program, because she was holding the same Captain America cup, or a very similar Captain America cup, with one being a Funko Pop and the other one being just the shield. But now I really feel like she had this transition between the time she had worked for Weapon X and just before she had been hired by the Kingpin, which could have been possibly for her hiding her identity and not wanting to be associated with Weapon X, or perhaps even her involvement with like Weapon 30. But even now, it's like all of this just points right back to her. But even still, I feel like that's another video for another time. But with her more or less figuring out what Xemnu has been doing, and her realizing that it has taken its effect on her, but also realizing with Doc Samson remembering the old TV shows that Xemnu had made, which once again did not actually exist, this then brings the both of them to the realization that one, not everyone is as susceptible to the influence as others may be, but with this happening, Hulks are definitely not an exception, which immediately causes them to go check on Banner, with him punching back into the mirror and expressing that the Hulk was being a distraction, and on top of that, a distraction that he just got rid of. But here's the thing, like, even with your manipulated Banner blocking out the Savage Hulk, like, Savage Hulk at this point in time, he's really just trying to express
Critical
the same
empowerment
thing that he
results.
was trying to tell to Dr. McGowan in the first place when she had pulled him away from Xemnu. But the problem is just that the Savage Hulk, he's not the best communicator, which is why at the time the Devil Hulk had stepped in. But now, with the Savage Hulk still trying to get this message through and trying to smash it through to Bruce Banner, a different Hulk then steps forward, telling him that he understands what Xemnu is doing, and that resolving this is not something that the Savage Hulk can just smash his way through to. And this is where we find out that he's been approached by Green Scar Hulk, who is towering over Savage Hulk. But it's funny because he tells Savage Hulk, like, Xemnu isn't stronger than we are, but just to be clear, I'm the strongest one there is. And this is insane because, like, ever since Absolute Carnage, we had seen the discussion between the different Hulks when they were deciding whether or not they would let the Venom symbiote in. And at that time, we knew that there were more Hulks in there. And we were kind of wondering, like, when are the other ones gonna chime in? And it's like, now we're finally getting that. And I'm just gonna go ahead and say it, like, as far as in comparison, like, Xemnu is no match for Savage Hulk. And if Dario Agger could have taken out Savage Hulk by now, he would have. And I'm telling you, man, like, if you take Dario Agger and Xemnu and place them against Green Scar Hulk, you pretty much got a matchup that's looking like two popsicles versus a flamethrower, because neither one of those guys was built for this force of nature. And I gotta tell you guys, I'm just excited to see Green Scar back, and I just hope that he doesn't end these guys too quickly, because I truly want this to take its time, and I want Green Scar Hulk to stick around for a while. Because could you imagine, like, with a Hulk who has taken over Shadow Base, like, using those new resources and, like, refashioning his armor, his weapons, and not even because he needs them, but just like his new toys and accessories to display with this newer version of this Hulk. Like, oh man, like, this could be insane. But real quick, just want to give a shout out to all the Patreons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who would like more information on how to become a Patreon and support the channel, I got a link down in the description where you can visit patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and let me know what you guys think
Critical
about the return
empowerment
of Green
results.
Scar Hulk, who for the longest time has been suppressed by Banner since World War Hulk, to where it seems like now he's able to bypass that. But let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again in the next one. Alright, later.
Critical empowerment results. Critical empowerment results. Critical empowerment results. Critical empowerment results.
Sweet. What to do about you?
Special assignment received. Initializing. Temporary abilities acquired.
Burn, baby.
Additional assignment received. Initializing. Additional assignment received. Initializing.
This is Star Talk.
Greetings, greetings, greetings. Welcome to Star Talk Radio. I'm your host, Bill Nye, here with Wide World Citizen of the World Wide World, Chuck Nice.
That's right.
And this is a special All-Star edition. And Chuck, here's the interesting thing. I'm the All-Star.
You are the All-Star.
I'm starring all-wise here. It's good. No, it's really fun. I really appreciate you guys including me. Now, this is a cosmic query.
Yes, it is.
I see you have stacks of querical queries.
Yes, I do. From all over the
Inquiries.
interwebs.
That
Twitter.
electric thing the kids use.
Yeah,
Their electric machines.
I hear that thing's catching on.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know what's going on
This
with
is
that.
cool. Thank you all for sending in questions. Chuck, let's read one.
Let's get right to it, okay? And this is from Dan Gomez. Dan says, what exactly is inside of a vacuum? If not matter, then some sort of cosmic energy? The fabric of reality?
Well, there's energy passes through a vacuum.
Right.
So we love that. We're talking about light, heat, all these exciting things. Then you ask a good question. People talk about space-time, using it as one word, space-time. And it's generally agreed that not only is the universe expanding, but space itself is expanding. So most of space has what we reckon as no matter, nothing in it. So perhaps any vacuum you have is also expanding along with space if it's away from a gravity field or away from a local gravity field.
Okay.
Maybe it's expanding and we just can't sense it. It's one of the rules. It's crazy. It's crazy.
It's pretty wild.
It is wild. It really is profound.
Yeah. All right. Actually, Dan, very good question. I
You don't have to sound so surprised. He's a Star Trek listener, Star Talk listener. Which brings me to this next thing. These questions are generally about science fiction, right?
yes, that's right.
So Star Trek will
This is
probably come up.
Star Trek is definitely going to come up because this is sci-fi and scientists on TV. These are the what the inquiries are about. Let's go to Sam, THFC.
All right, I have
What
no
that
problem
means?
with
I
that.
don't know what THFC means, but he's coming to us from Twitter. Twitter. I just made up a whole new social media. Look for it. Twitter coming to a
Chuck Knight
phone near you.
Twitter sweeter. So give us a tweet from the twit.
Here's what he says. What fictional
Gee whiz, that
scientist?
didn't sound right. I apologize. Give us a tweet from the Twitter.
What fictional scientist do you think would, if he or her and his or her science were real, would benefit mankind the most? Do you have somebody that you like as a fictional scientist that you believe, if they were real, they would actually be a huge benefit to mankind?
The person, the man or woman who invents a way to filter salt water and make it into fresh water.
Oh, wow.
And that person may exist right now, but this is a hypothetical thing.
Wow.
And it may not be one person, maybe a corporation who continually dinks around with materials to make this possible, but that would be great if you could make seawater economically into fresh water.
So now, what is the big deal of not big deal? What is the
Difficulty.
big obstacle for capturing fresh water from salt water or desalinating?
Energy. It takes energy, right?
Too much.
You either have to boil it, often in a partial vacuum, so-called partial flash distillation, or you push it through a osmotic filter, a filter that filters molecules, and get the fresh water to come out the other side, but it takes a lot of pressure. That's what they do on cruise ships and submarines.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so one can help but wonder if there isn't some trick to make that easier.
Right.
One's hopeful.
And is it going to be necessary one day? I mean, are we going to be in a position where we're out of fresh water?
Well, yeah, people talk about it all the time, but it would enable so much. It would be so cool if you could take seawater and make it into fresh water along the coast. Most people in the world live along coastlines. So it would be really a terrific thing if you could do it economically, especially for the developing world.
Nice. I love it. So what's funny is that they were talking about a character, but you went with an actual scientific thing
that some humans
can actually do at some point.
Yes.
Love it.
Happen right now while we're talking Star-wise.
There may be somebody out there doing it as we speak. All right, here we go. Wow, this person. Oh, nope.
You stumped yourself.
It's Kelly Klemenko.
Kelly
Klemenko wants to know this. Doc Brown and the DeLorean.
Yes, Doc Brown.
The good, the bad, and what do you think a flux capacitor really is, or could be?
Let's start with the following thing. We just did, for those of you who watch Star Talk on the TV, we just did a time travel bit where I was in one of the DeLoreans was used in the movie. There's a company in New Jersey that maintains these movie cars, Batmobiles and Green Hornet cars.
Right.
And the door. So I was in it and I threw a switch and it was funny and charming. The flux capacitor, you may recall, was running on banana peels and stuff.
Right.
And then, as far as we know, you can't travel through time. But science fiction writers love that.
Yes.
And can you go back in time? The big question is, can you go back in time and change history?
Right.
Would you just get the captain of the Titanic to slow down, man?
Right.
Gee whiz.
See, the thing is, he would slow down, and somehow the Titanic would still sink.
Well, that's it, if your interpretation of time travel. But, on what is generally regarded as the very best of the original Star Trek series, City on the Edge of Forever, you go back in time and somehow Hitler takes over the world because the pacifism from Edith Keeler keeps the United States from entering the wars.
Because Kurt actually saves her from getting hit by a car.
So you're familiar. And then they change, and
that changes the outcome of everything.
More modern viewers, young people, may wonder if you can send an emissary back in time to have sex with a waitress who then turns out to be your own mother.
Right.
Can you do that the way that we did in...
that's the Terminator.
Yeah.
That's the entire
premise
of the Terminator.
But traveling in time is quite difficult unless, like Chuck and myself, you are happy with traveling just one way.
Right.
Forward. Older.
Right.
Closer to death.
Yeah.
And that's where we're going right now.
I started off laughing, I ended up crying.
Chuck's an artist. He's an artist. But it is a troubling thing. After you reach adulthood, heavens, Bill.
Yes.
After you reach adulthood, your head is headed toward death.
Yes.
Very troubling, but nevertheless apparently true fact, as opposed to a false fact.
Well, this question took a decidedly morbid turn.
Well, or either that or deal. Okay? We're only going one way. You can't go back in time. So play the hand you're dealt. All right? Let's get on with it. Quit pining for something that's not possible.
Yes, you're never going back to win that big game at state. Okay?
Take that as a learning experience for your next big game.
That's
and then
right.
also, furthermore, to continue, there is a very, which I say for comedic effect, there's a very reasonable theory in physics that you could build a time machine, but you could only go back to when the machine was built.
Couldn't go any further.
No. And furthermore, further back in time more, You can only you have to travel at relativistic speeds to get there, which would be akin to falling into a black hole, which would tear you apart from its own gravity. So it's just not that easy. So everybody, I don't mean to be dismissive of time travel, but don't count on it to solve your problems.
Right.
Let's say you live on a planet that is where a certain species is burning so much ancient fuel that they're accelerating the rate of warming by about a factor of 1,000,000. Let's just say you can't pine
Can't
for
even
the day.
imagine what kind of planet
You
this
can't pine for the day when you could have done something about it at the turn of a couple centuries ago. You got to play the hand we're dealt right now and address climate change.
Right. Which, you know, I'd like to believe is going to happen.
Yes.
But I also believe that people are stupid. And none of you listening.
No. Yes.
You.
No.
Other hearing our voices right now, but
Other people.
there are other people who are quite frankly stupid, and they don't believe anything you just said. As a matter of fact, one of them is a senator. His name is Inhofe, and he actually wrote a book called "The Biggest Hoax Ever" or something like
Yes,
that.
yeah, you're digressing a bit, Chuck, but I appreciate it.
He's a senator, Bill.
I know. He gets reelected
Local
all
bounty
the time.
detected.
He represents.
Initiating.
There's only 2 of them for his state.
I know.
He represents half of a state.
I know.
And he says it's a hoax. Guys like you who do this so they can get money. Because that's what happens when you say that the...
Chuck, you're going kind of Bill Cosby on me there. your
Yes,
speech
and
pattern.
I would like to invite you over for some cappuccino, Bill.
Thank you, Dr. Huck.
All right.
But
Yeah.
this said,
Yes.
Chuck, your digression is worthy. It's just something to think about. You know, time travel is a cool idea in science fiction, but let's keep an eye on the prize. We almost certainly cannot travel through time. We cannot go back in time and fix things.
Right.
So we got to play the hand we're dealt.
There you
Lead
go.
on.
There you go. Let's move on to another query and keep those very grave words in mind.
Oh, they're
while
also
still
empowering.
having-
They're also empowering.
They are empowering.
Constraints are empowering.
Absolutely.
We got to solve this problem. Let's go.
Okay, here we go. Jonathan B. East at Becco Meest. I like that. From Twitter says, if you could interview any fictional scientist,
Fictional scientists.
somebody from the movies or a book or anything like that, who would it be and why? And he's coming to us from Indiana, the state.
Well, it's fictional.
Fictional. So, like, is there any fictional character that you admire, whatever they embody, the character embodies certain values?
Your first cut is you'd say Mr. Spock, right? Would you like to chat it up with Mr. Spock?
I have to tell you that I've often fantasized about that.
But then fictional scientist, the guy who invents the time machine in the H.G. Wells' The Time Machine.
Right.
That might be how did you do that?
That's a pretty, especially how did you do it out of bubble gum and
Critical
a pinwheel?
empowerment results.
Whatever.
Basically, it was a
He
chair with a
oils
big
something.
fan on it.
He oils something and is able to try. Yeah, if that would be a good
Right.
couple of questions.
All right.
But I will say, as charming as all that is, there's some real people I'd love to interview.
I was about to go there.
Yeah. I mean,
I was about to say.
yeah.
Are
We
there?
wouldn't like to talk to.
Would you now? Would you rather speak to
Rosalind Franklin or
Rosalind Franklin or Albert Einstein?
oh man,
Yeah, buddy.
I'd like to talk to Rosalind because
Yeah.
you don't hear that much about her. I mean,
Okay.
people write books now, but I would like to know what her life was like.
Sweet.
She had a tough road to hoe there. She was the only woman
Oh.
on the thing
I was going to say, when you're a female, I mean,
back in the 1950s.
it's not going to
For
be.
those of you who are down, not hip, not down, she took the picture that enabled Watson and Crick to envision DNA,
Right.
the spiral, the double helix. But did she envision it first? Because she looked at the picture and then the men took credit.
Right.
Arguments have ensued.
Aha.
There have been whole radio shows devoted to this argument. I can't resolve it right now, but it is intriguing.
And clearly still having ramifications to this day. We probably one of the most important discoveries ever.
Yeah. By the way, Darwin and Russell discovered evolution without any knowledge of DNA. It's amazing.
That is amazing.
It is amazing.
Yes.
Talk about discipline, scientific method.
Just
very cool.
straight observation.
Just observing and thinking.
Yeah, exactly. Sweet.
So don't forget, if you ever read Origin of Species, Darwin did all kinds of very diligent naturalist experiments. He's a really impressive guy. I mean, I know everybody says that, but he really was quite the experimentalist as well as the observationalist naturalist.
Right. All right, cool.
Lead on.
So there you go. Good question. I like that. All right, let me move on to another query. This is Denard Springle coming to I like that name. Coming to us from Google Plus. He says, how much more interesting would Lost in Space have been if they'd elaborated more on Dr. Maureen Robinson's biochemical background instead of having her be the typical housewife in space, preparing meals, tending to the garden, etc., etc.
Well, it sounds like, from your point of view, Mr. and Ms. Springle, it would have been a lot better. And notice that, compare and contrast the contemporary show Lost in Space with Star Trek.
Right.
Star Trek, the women were empowered. Yes, there was a lot of legs. Yes, there were a lot of
mini skirts,
a lot of nice uniforms.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately,
green women
who were strangely hot.
Yes.
But ultimately, right there in the middle of the whole thing was Lieutenant Uhura.
Yes.
Who was an empowered woman.
Yes,
who
he
ran
was.
things. And then you'd come across your woman Romulan, who was in charge of a ship, and so on.
Right.
And so.
And then you go forward into the Star Trek series. You have. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Chuck, take it.
Of course, there's Captain Janeway.
Right there, running the whole freaking starship.
Starship, who became Admiral Janeway.
That's right. And notice, but that shows that the woman's movement, at least here in the United States, was reflected in science fiction.
Right.
You know what I mean? You know what I mean?
So
I can't hear you. I don't know why I would say such a thing, but you see that the evolution right there. And by the way, Nichelle Nichols came to the 35th anniversary of the Planetary Society, October 2015, and she told the story again, Chuck. She's told the story countless times. She's very gracious about it.
About what?
Martin Luther King called her.
Yes.
Apparently on the phone.
I have a dream.
Yeah, and he said, you can't quit this job. She was going to quit. She wanted to go back to Broadway or whatever she was as a big-time actress, not pretending to be in the 23rd century.
Right.
And he said, you can't quit this job.
He saw the value
in
her being on the bridge of a starship in the future. And as a ranking officer, a lieutenant.
Who was responsible for all kinds of important things.
Right.
And so it was really a moving moment for me. It was just a few months ago. And, wow.
You know what's funny about Lieutenant Uhura is a lot of people say, well, she was nothing but an operator. You know, and the truth of the matter was, she was the first contact for anyone.
That's right. She was Capcom.
That's right.
No, but really, Capcom's a big job.
It goes. So.
No, she was a big deal, and she made decisions, and she had to remain calm in some pretty stressful situations, albeit fictional ones. But it was to the point where Martin Luther King himself says, my friend, Ms. Nichols, you can't quit this gig, because you're a role model for African-American people and women especially.
I do believe you are future.
Well,
it makes sense.
Quite a story that she told, I gotta say.
I was completely unaware of that story, and that's a great...
Yeah, but she's told it a lot of times, but she was very nice about it.
Nah, it's very cool. It's very cool. Then it kind of goes to show you the importance of
television, science fiction. And by the way, the thing about Star Trek, as a Trekkie,
yes,
it's an optimistic view of the future through science. It is not an apocalyptic view of the future. It is not science is bad and leads to disaster. Science is good and leads to all material needs being taken care of. And any conflict we have is when we encounter new cultures who are not totally hip to.
Right. They don't get it the way we do.
Well, they haven't had a chance.
Yeah. There you go. All right. Super cool. All right, here we go. This is Corey Kilabitch.
Oh, heavens. Chuck, you got to edit before you read. I've only got 30 seconds left in this segment. You're coughing to death. This person sent you a joke name.
I know that.
Suck you right in.
Suck me right in with the joke name.
We're going to get to this. Cosmic Queries with a science fiction bent.
Here we go. How far are we?
So let's get the question. We'll tease it. Come back after the break. Brilliant. What's the question?
Here's the question. How far are we from force fields and inertial dampers? That's the question from Corey Kilabitch.
Okay. We're not too far from either one. And Chuck and I will tell you all about it when Star Talk returns right after this. Welcome back. I'm your host, Bill Nye. Welcome back to Star Talk. That's my colleague, citizen of the wide world, Chuck Nice, who is rendering his own a cappella version of the original Star Trek theme song. And the reason he's doing that is because this Cosmic Query segment is generally on a science fiction theme.
Yes, it is.
Now, we had a query about force fields.
Yes, we did. Who came to us from a joke name that I
inertial
didn't catch.
damping.
And it was Corey Kilovich who said on Instagram, how far are we from force fields and inertial dampers?
So let me just say, in the biggest picture, you live in a force field. Gravity is a force field. It can be thought of as a field, and recently it was proven that it also apparently travels in waves. Gravity does. And so this was predicted, or very reasonable to physicists, and now we had an instrument that measured that. But I think I know at which you drive. Plus, we also have dampers, inertial dampers. The British term was dampener, but in American English, the middle syllable got dropped. And this is a shock absorber in a car. And a damper generally means something that goes at a rate. The faster you move the car axle, the more damping you get, the more damping retarding force you get.
Right.
It's a little bit out of your mathematical experience for most people, but it's out of your it is out of your everyday experience. And you know this when you try to bounce a car up and down, which you can do. You can make it with the cars in park, everybody perfectly safe. Push it up and down. You'll find the faster you try to make it go, the more difficult it is. Now, with that said,
just flip your switch on your lowrider. That's all.
Oh yeah, for our lowrider listeners, the many Star Talk lowrider listeners that are out there, I'm sure there are a few of you. Thank you for your good work.
That's right.
But I think what she's driving at is tractor beam.
Know it.
In fact, I heard a pundit, I believe, on Meet the Press, use the term tractor beam talking about the current presidential election.
Yeah.
A tractor beam is so far not a real thing.
Of course.
But wouldn't it be great, instead of a tugboat having to throw a line out to the barge it's towing, you could just do it with some sort of electromagnetic beam with the accompanying sound effect that would bring the barge up the river or through deep space easily. So it's a cool idea. I don't know. I think we're pretty far away from that.
Okay.
So I think we're pretty far away.
Pretty far away.
We do have force fields.
We do have force fields?
We're living in one. You may rub your hair on a balloon and feel your hair stand on end on your forearm. And then you also will get a beam of light that pushes the spacecraft in space.
Ah, I wonder if
the planetary society, for example.
Sounds vaguely familiar
Yes.
to me.
Planetary.org, consider
Yes.
joining. Yeah, so you were saying.
Light sailing.
I mean, another query.
Novel idea, light sailing.
No, it's cool. It was really good, and we're going to fly again. This was scheduled for September, but it will probably slip to November. Be a ride on the Falcon Heavy.
Oh.
SpaceX rocket with 27 engines instead of 9.
Nice.
Cool.
All right, man. Well, good luck for the next flight. Here we go. Walter Vinci wants to know this. In sci-fi, if one were to have a laser gun capable of producing a visible shock, what would the effects on the shooter, the target, and those in the vicinity be?
So,
well, he's basically talking about a phaser or...
Oh, there are laser weapons. We had a laser weapon flying around on a 747. And the idea is the momentum, which you're talking like the recoil from a conventional bullet type gun, shotgun, whatever, is very small with a laser because all you're doing is reacting the photon pressure. But what the deal is you're sending heat at the target. And so the heat can damage a target in a new way. That's not momentum, it's not recoil, it's burning stuff up. And then if you tune it, you can have a maser, a microwave beam that messes up the enemy's radar.
Right.
That's not that anybody would spend tax dollars doing that in our peaceful way of life, but I've heard of it.
And would it make the pew sound? I mean, would
I
it?
hope so.
Would we ever make a
You know
laser?
how we produce that pew sound? They got a guy wire, you know what I mean, a real long wire that holds up an antenna.
Right.
And you tap it.
Oh, okay, and that's the It's going in.
And it's so it's conventional mechanical resonance, just like a violin or guitar string.
Exactly.
It has a certain tightness. Very cool.
Nice. All right.
We all know that's the sound of blaster.
It's a blaster.
Gotta say, saw the new Star Wars movie.
Speaking of,
Yeah, the Stormtrooper armor.
yes.
It's not very good.
No, it isn't.
People burn right through it.
Well, yeah. I don't know why they. You would think it would be somewhat protective, but every stormtrooper that gets hit by a blaster
Yes.
goes down, and
Yeah.
goes down pretty easily too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's bad.
All right, here we go.
Another fiction problem that I can't really. No one. I wasn't consulted.
Okay. Do you think? Okay, this is from AUTKD. Mm-hmm. Do you think something such as the death of the planet Krypton could ever happen to Earth?
No.
Right.
Any other questions? Just exploding planets don't
doesn't
happen. With that said, the Earth's moon apparently was created by a pretty big thing hitting the proto-Earth, the Earth in its early days.
Earth wasn't fully formed the way it is
Yeah,
right now.
So it did destroy a planet, but maybe it formed a new planet and a moon. But that's not the same as the way it's depicted in Superman, where stuff just blows up.
Yes, it just and that's it, and completely falls apart.
Yeah, so I don't see any way for that to happen. Stars, they do that.
Well,
They supernova.
They do both, right?
Supernovae.
They blow up and they implode,
And
right?
they do all that. But we're talking about a planet, and so if you like to worry about things, I wouldn't put that up high.
Right.
I'd put climate change way up higher.
Way up higher than Krypton like death.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. So
Right.
no need to put any kids inside of a little escape pod, or
Probably not.
send them off to a
Much
distant
better
galaxy.
to improve the environment we have.
Right.
Much better.
So
Pick an incluso pod.
there you go. So I guess that's an inclusive
Yeah.
pod.
Rather than in this,
Pardon me.
Stay on Earth pod.
Yeah, which is called Earth.
Yes.
So we should probably take care of this place.
Should.
Here we go. Yes, this is Scott.
That's his title. That's pretty good.
Yes, this is Scott.
Yes, this is Scott. What's your query?
Here's what Yes, this is Scott wants to know. Thoughts on our country's education system, particularly as it pertains to the scientific ignorance of the average U.S. citizen? Could I have some of that from you, Mr. Nye?
Well, we have a big concern. So, for example, I was at the Science Teacher Convention,
Okay.
and one of the fights that the Science Teachers Association fights is this current opposition to Common Core standards.
Yes, I hear that's a big deal.
Now,
Common Core.
you wouldn't think it would be. Why not have a set of ideas that we agree everybody should know? Everybody should learn the alphabet, for example. It'd be hard to read and conduct your life without memorizing the order of the letters.
Kinda.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, along that line, there's some other things we want people to know about certain plays and certain poems and certain pieces of art.
Right.
We also want people to know certain facts and discoveries in the process of science and the process of science. But right now, so the educators around the U.S. got together and came up with this Common Core of standards, C-O-R-E of standards. But then it came to be opposed by certain states who don't want to teach evolution. What we're-
Okay, now see.
And this Common Core is being opposed in the name of states' rights, but it's being opposed really by people who are not aware of the fundamental idea in all of biology.
See, I have to tell you that they're quite insidious the way they make their argument, because they never let you know that there's an actual opposition to something so specific as evolution.
It's states' rights.
Yeah, states' rights. They never broach the issue of evolution in the fight for Common Core, and I've the fight against Common Core, and I've always wondered, why is it that it's just one particular a group of people who are always decrying Common Core, and then I thought,
First, everybody thought it was a great idea.
Yes.
Conservatives and progressives.
right.
But then when people realized that if you had science teachers including the basic idea in all of life science, the evolution, they started to like totally freak. And so there's a basic idea in geology, plate tectonics. Right? There's a basic idea in physics. Energy can either be created or destroyed. Okay, and so we love that. So there's a basic idea in life science that things change as they reproduce, which we call the process of evolution.
Evolution, right.
My goodness, people.
Wow. You know what? This is why I love co-hosting these shows, because certain things just pop up on these shows.
Oh, yes.
You never realize.
This is my little business.
This is it, man.
This is why we answer these queries.
Exactly. And this is super cool because that's the real deal. The real deal is it's evolution.
They don't want it.
The big problem is evolution.
Because they're afraid of it. There's some people who are empowered. Neil Tyson, myself, you, I presume,
yes,
are excited and empowered by the idea that we don't have all the answers.
Exactly.
Other people are deeply troubled.
Never understood.
All the answers, everything spelled out right now. We want to know everything there is to know about the universe right now. And when you challenge that, they get unsettled.
Yeah.
And I consider that entirely my fault as a science educator. I'm getting people excited about it. They just grow up afraid of it.
Don't blame yourself. That's wow. So there you have it. Hey, listen, this is Scott. Thank you for that question. That was
Yes,
quite
this is
enlightening.
Special assignment
really good.
received.
Yeah.
Initializing.
All right, let's move on. Let's get to Spenny 46. Spenny wants to know this. In order to achieve warp speed,
Oh, yeah.
like in Star Trek.
Way you do.
Yeah, you know the way you do in Star Trek, right? You know?
Sure.
Number one, engage. That's how you achieve it, by the way, Spenny. Number one, engage. What would the ship have to be made out of? So,
Well, they generally agreed that you'd start with some sort of unobtainium and build out from there. Keep in mind, there is no evidence that you can actually travel at warp speed. It's a science fiction device to enable interactions between people. You know, what makes any good story is what's happening between people.
Temporary
yes, there can be
abilities
Andorians
acquired.
and Romulans and Klingons. There can be Xenonians and so on. But any science fiction story has to do with us, humans, interacting. And yeah, there's some issues about what's possible technologically in the future or the past, but it's really about what people are doing to each other. So there's no evidence that there really is a warp drive, and I don't know what the ship would be made of.
yeah, okay, there you have
It'd
it.
be really strong.
It would be, because you're warping space
That's
to
right.
travel through it, which means whatever it is getting stretched out through space,
Sure it is.
showing up someplace
There's
else.
artificial gravity.
Right.
Everybody speaks English when you get there. That's key. Big time sentence.
That's awesome. Yes. How did that happen? Here we are, halfway across the galaxy, but yet somehow these guys speak English.
It's crazy.
Oh man, it's
Unexpected.
yeah.
Well, it's a remarkable example of Hodgkin's laws of parallel planetary development. Boy, I am an old geek.
I love it.
Take it.
Love it. Here we go. Oh my God. Here we go from Ethan Bottoms. Ethan says, Bill, what's your favorite sci-fi technology, and what would be its real-life equivalent?
Two things. First of all, I'd love to have a transporter.
Oh God, so
But people have done analysis on the information theory involved in taking a few trillion cells and putting them back together.
reassembling them.
It's a huge amount of energy required. But the other one that we'd all like is subspace radio,
Right.
where no matter where the other person is, no matter how fast he or she is traveling, no matter what's going on, you can talk to him or her.
Yes.
We've almost got it.
For real.
I mean, you take out your mobile phone, you can talk to pretty much anybody in the world. Once in a while,
It's true.
the transmission is not as good as it might be. Once in a while, it's breaking up. Once in a while, you have to move near the window.
Right.
Once in a while, the
Sometimes I'm
phone
roaming
goes
in my
dead.
own apartment for
Yes,
no reason.
Yes. Your data costs more than your voice and so on, but we're getting close where you can talk to anybody, anywhere, anytime. Now, you can fly on planes 6 miles above the earth
Yes.
and be on the internet. communicating, taking care of things. And it's not going to be long before people will be able to talk routinely. I'm sure there'll be phone booths on planes again. I don't know if you remember the radio phones that were $10 a minute or something.
No.
Airplanes. But this will come back around. We'll have the equivalent of subspace radio.
Right. Okay. So subspace radio. That's
what I'd like.
Be nice. Right?
Yeah. Be nice like you, Chuck.
Mm-hmm. I like that. I like what we did there.
That's brilliant.
Very cool.
No one's ever thought of it.
All right, here we go.
Nigh the end of the segment.
We are nigh the end of the segment. I don't even think. Well, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and give you this one. Why are this is Hova Casanova? Why are fictional scientists usually portrayed as bad guys?
Because you need enemies in stories, and you want the good guy to be like you. Man against the universe, man against himself, or man against man. That's how you run an English class. So you have the man be a bad guy from the future. He's fictional. This is Star Talk with Chuck Nice, and I've been your host, Bill Nye. Turn it up loud and keep looking up. Welcome back to Star Talk Radio. I'm your host, Bill Nye, here with the worldwide citizen of the wide world, Chuck Nice.
That's right, sir.
And it's the Cosmic Queries Continued, where we take your questions from the cosmos and your enquiries and do our best to respond. Chuck.
Well, you're going to do your best to respond. Nobody wants to hear from me.
Chuck, you provide great insight on this show.
Oh, Bill, that's very nice of you to say. You are beyond kind, sir. Here, Kaylee.
Who else could say Kaylee except you, besides you?
Who else could butcher the name?
Yeah, take it.
Better than you, Chuck. Here we go. Kaylee Bush wants to know this. In many science fiction movies, hypersleep is used by astronauts. Hypersleep is used by astronauts on long voyages to make their trips seem shorter. Is hypersleep possible? If so, would it be a valid method to keep future astronauts sane during long trips in space?
A couple things about that. You may have met a bear or squirrels. These kids hibernate.
They do a little something called hibernation.
Yeah, and so it's very reasonable. They're mammals.
Mm-hmm.
They're mammals. It's very reasonable that you could figure out how they do it.
Right.
And then you'd enable astronauts to do that. It's not. I don't think it's to keep astronauts from going crazy so much as to keep astronauts from aging too much, right? And you go on these long trips, and then it seems reasonable to do that. However, with that said, Mark Kelly just finished almost a year in space, 340 days in space, and he remarked, you could go 2 years. I could go 2 years. Astronauts are anything but bored. They have, if anything, too much to do.
Yeah, that's what
get things going. Yeah.
One of the things he said is that there's so much to do. There's so many things all day long that he's doing that he doesn't think about it like that.
He doesn't run out of mental stuff to do. So this is a great question, but very reasonable to enable astronauts to make this long journey without having to eat as much,
right,
and process the waste as much, having as much time seriously in sleep cycles. It's very reasonable to have people in suspended animation, and in science fiction movies, what you generally do is have the people in suspended animation kill each other or die.
Or wait, one of the chambers malfunctions.
That's right.
And when they get to wherever they're going, it's a corpse.
Yeah.
Dried up corpse.
Yeah, and he didn't even know it, or she, because he or she was asleep during this traumatic time. But this is it's a fine idea in science fiction, but it goes way back because we observe bears who hibernate. Why couldn't we do that with the right hormones or berry and bark diet?
Yes.
It's a good question.
There you go. Good question. Oh, wait. Way to go, Kaylee. Ethan, the cool guy, Smith.
That's quite a claim.
What a claim.
Ethan?
Yes, he says, why does it seem that with every new generation, there is a new level of both scientific acceptance and scientific ignorance? Which is a wonderful question, especially when you're thinking about science fiction. I mean, he's absolutely right. When you think back from the time of Galileo till now, Jesus, man, the leaps and bounds we've made. But yet, when you look at where we are right now, you can't believe that people are such idiots that they believe some of the things they believe.
For example, give me an example.
Like for example, that human activity may be creating climate change that is deleterious to the entire ecosystem of this planet upon which we live.
And denying that.
And denying that.
Yes, in the face of evidence.
Right.
Or denying that organisms change through the process of evolution.
How about that?
Yes. Or,
even though we have clear evidence.
Fundamental idea in life science. So you're asking a great question. I think there's an expression, I think, in almost every culture, the good old days.
Good old days.
People have a way, I think it's a survival mechanism. We have
Additional
a way of
assignment
suppressing the really
received.
traumatic
Initializing.
times and embracing the happy times.
Right.
And these are the good old days. And so the ultimate manifestation of that is, if only things were the way they were when I understood everything. Now it gets away from me as these changes around us are happening in technology, culture, the speed of things. But you got to get over it. It's back to this deal that I talk about all the time. Some people are greatly troubled by change.
Yes.
Other people accept it as part of the excitement of being alive.
Right.
So it's a great question, but we are working very hard here at Star Talk to empower the world's citizens to know science.
Mm-hmm.
And at Planetary Society to know the cosmos and our place within it. That's why we want to know the cosmos and realize that we don't know everything.
Additional assignment received.
Pursue
Initializing.
in nature. Find out nature's rules so that we know where we fit in the great scheme of things.
Yes.
Where did we come from? Are we alone? These are deep questions, answers with science. Some people think it's cool, other people are troubled. And the troubled people are the ones living in the past.
There you have it.
So far.
Hey, I have to say that that was a very cool question, Ethan, Cool Guy Smith. So.
Thank you, Ethan Smith, the cool guy. Read on.
Here we go. BTU 0105.
British Thermal Unit 0105.
Yes. 105 wants to know this. The professor on Gilligan's Island always seemed to be using seawater and coconuts to power gadgets like radios. First of all, is that feasible?
Depends. If you have enough dissimilar metals, but the classics you might be familiar with are copper and zinc.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can make a battery. But I don't know that you can power a coconut radio.
Right, I was going to say.
But I remind you, a lot of the stuff
coconut was
that
there just for aesthetics.
Give it to tropical island.
Yeah, exactly.
I remind you, a lot of the stuff the professor did on Gilligan's Island was not real. And so this enabled the plot to be advanced. And you'll notice, generally in Gilligan's Island, he'd get it almost working.
Yes.
For a few seconds.
And then
and then doggone it. And so, with that said, changing the subject to a more recent, more desperate situation on Lost. What I say I was a pretty good Boy Scout.
Right.
Get off the island.
We got some more trouble you people, because all they cared about was what was happening on the island.
That's just gotta say. When I watched was it the Blair Witch Project?
Yes.
Get out of the woods! What's wrong with you? We lost the map. Follow the stream, you clowns.
There you go.
I had no sympathy for those people. Maybe somebody will kill them and we can move on. Yes. Oh, Bill, you're so harsh. I'm just telling you. These are, through the process of science, you would find a way.
Good job.
You would find a way to get out of the woods, off the island. Especially, how long was that on? 5 years?
Yes.
3.5 years?
Yeah.
Somebody would get something done, people.
All right, there you have it, BTU. The professor was a fraud.
Not a
He was a fictional character. I think he never had anything that worked because he was secretly doing something with Ginger.
So, I don't need to know, Chuck.
Yeah.
But are you Ginger or Marianne?
I got to tell the truth. I'm more of a Marianne.
I'm total Marianne.
I'm a Marianne guy. Yeah.
I'm sympathetic to the Ginger thing.
I'm sympathetic to the Ginger too, but that looked a little high maintenance and
a lot of work.
Honestly, a lot of work going in there.
Yeah.
And didn't look like it would be worth it. Whereas Marianne,
that's it. She was accessible.
Yeah, and also felt like when it when my pursuits were achieved, that I may want to spend some time with Marianne.
Yeah. So everybody, if you're not familiar with these references, a lot of the reason young men watch television is to look at women. And if you look at the cover of any I walk by here in New York, you walk by newsstands continually.
All the time.
So many of the magazines feature women rather
On
than
the cover, not
no
men.
problem with that. I gotta say, if it ain't broke. So in this show, Gilligan's Island, we can all ask ourselves, which of these contrasting personalities would you prefer?
Right.
And I think this is a good moment, Chuck, with that important digression resolved.
Yes.
Get at last to the lightning round.
Yes, and that is where we will speed things up and take as many questions as we can in the remaining time. So let us move on and say from, Zeba Films wants to know this. Hi, Bill. Are you happy?
I'm happy because you're sending questions or queries to Star Talk.
There you go. That was simple enough. We're off to a very good start. This is from Andres Gamma 07. Andres Gamma 07 wants to know this. In Star Trek, are you really, when you're teleported to another place, are you really being teleported, or is it a copy of you?
Oh, no, you're really being teleported.
Right.
I've seen it.
Easy enough. Jay Shipka wants to know this. Is it possible to convert sound waves into an energy source?
Energy source.
Yes.
Has to be really loud. Think about how little energy it takes to make a big cymbal crash. I mean, really compared to something else. You know, if you have stereo speakers, they might be 100 watts.
Right.
Just think how loud that gets. So, yeah, we turn electrical energy into sound all the time.
Wow, there you go.
I'm doing it right now. It's a radio podcast.
Yes, there's your answer, Jay Shipka. It's happening right before you. You're soaking
He
it.
wants to go the other way. He wants to take sound.
He wants to
and
take
make it
sound.
You
Like
can
a
do
sonic
that.
boom.
Moderation.
Okay, here we go.
It's still playing.
Alphabetize wants to know this. What are the chances of humanity recovering after a catastrophic extinction event? The subject of many, many movies.
They're pretty good. Humans are said to be extinction proof. That is to say, there's so many of us living on so many continents that even in
There's going to be a
catastrophe,
remnant.
somebody will be around and they'll be doing it. They'll be making more humans. I'm just saying, if you like to worry about things, that one, I'd set that one aside.
Okay, there you go. Benjamin and Luria. That's, he wants to know this. Could Rick's portal gun from Rick and Morty ever exist? In other words, could we ever have a means of creating a dimensional portal?
Oh, yeah. It's easy enough. No! You make you feel better? No! But it's good. It enables the plot.
Okay. DJ Pure Logic wants to know this. Will humanity survive long enough to achieve a Type 2 or 3 civilization?
We'll see, won't we? If we can live on pure energy and become electrobores. It's not going to happen this weekend.
Right.
Climate change is going to be a problem before then. These are great questions, maybe something worth achieving. But bear in mind the Type 1, 2, and 3 civilizations are human constructs. Who knows if there are any of them and what they think of us?
Very nice. Chris Shodrum.
Last name.
Shodrum. Chris Shodrum wants to know this. What did you learn today, Bill?
I learned how Chuck feels about climate change. He's concerned. He's got 3 kids.
Yeah, I have to tell you, oh God, I'm not going to get back on my little thing here because, yeah, I'm very concerned. Adam Bomb Baby wants to know this. If you could show one thing, be it a photograph, a painting, or a piece of music, a book, or a movie, or something completely different to an intelligent species from somewhere outside of our solar system, what would it be and why?
That's a great question.
That is a great question.
And if it's one thing?
One thing that you could show them, would it be art? Would it be literature? Would it be a photograph? Would it be, a mathematical equation?
I might show them a rocket. I might show them a spacecraft.
Okay.
But that's a tough one.
That's a tough one.
It's a tough one.
Mm-hmm.
I think I might show them...
I would just give them the internet and say, have at it.
Have at it. One thing.
Just one thing. It's the internet. Here you go. All right, so this is Davy Jones from San Bernardino, California. Wants to know what's your opinion on how science is overall depicted in Futurama, and Professor Farnsworth, a great scientist or the greatest scientist on TV?
It's just fun, you guys. Just fun. Don't put too much voracious true facts. There aren't that many facts in Futurama. With that said, Chuck, we've come to the end of our show.
Have indeed.
Cosmic Queries on Star Talk has been my worldwide citizen of the world, Chuck Nice.
Yes.
And I've been your host, Bill Nye. Please keep looking up.
This is Star Talk.